Here's the story you have been told about Rolex. A century ago, a young man with a vision set out to build the finest watch in the world. He obsessed over precision. He put his watches through hell, strapped them to the wrists of explorers and divers and pilots, sent them up mountains and down into the sea, and every time the little watch came back still ticking. And so the crown became the symbol of achievement. You do not buy a Rolex, you earn it. You buy it for yourself the day the promotion lands, the day the company sells, the day the baby is born. It is the watch you hand to your son. It keeps perfect time not because you need it to, but because it is a promise, cast in steel and gold, that some things are still built to last. That is the legend. It is beautifully told. It has sold millions of watches, and almost none of it explains how Rolex actually makes money. Because here's the fact that breaks the story. Rolex is not a company. Not really. Rolex is a charity. The entire business, every workshop, every retailer, every gold bar, is owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private charitable trust registered in Geneva. When Hans Wilsdorf's wife died and he had no children, he left the whole thing to a foundation. And that foundation still owns 100% of Rolex today. It means Rolex answers to no shareholders. It publishes no accounts. It pays a fraction of the tax a normal Swiss company of its size would pay because a chunk of its profit is legally routed to charitable purposes. The most aspirational luxury object on the planet, the thing you supposedly earn, is manufactured by a nonprofit that does not have to tell anyone what it earns. And once you understand that structure, the rest of Rolex stops looking like watchmaking and starts looking like something much stranger. But go back to the beginning, because the beginning is where the trick was invented. Hans Wilsdorf was German, born in Bavaria, orphaned young. He did not make watches. Sit with that, because it is the whole point. The man who built the most famous watch brand in history was not a watchmaker. He was a salesman. In 1905, in London, he set up a company that bought movements, the actual mechanical guts of a watch, from a Swiss firm and fitted them into cases. That was it. He was, in the language of today, a middleman. He assembled other people's parts and sold the result. And the product he was selling was not popular. Because in 1905, a serious man carried a pocket watch. A wristwatch was jewelry. It was for women. A gentleman would no more strap a clock to his wrist than wear a bonnet. So Wilsdorf had a problem that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with belief. The wristwatch was accurate enough. It was small enough. What it lacked was permission. Men did not believe a wristwatch could be a serious instrument, and no amount of quality would fix a belief. You cannot argue a man out of a prejudice. You have to show him. So Wilsdorf did the thing that would define the company for the next 100 years. He did not improve the watch and hope people noticed. He staged a proof. In 1910, he sent one of his wristwatches to an official Swiss testing institute and got it certified as a chronometer, a mark of precision that had only ever been given to marine clocks and pocket watches. A wristwatch had never earned it. His did. He now had a piece of paper that said, in the language of authority, that this toy kept time as well as the instruments ships navigated by. And the name itself was a manufactured object built with the same cold care as the watch. The company did not start as Rolex. Wilsdorf sat down and deliberately invented a word. He wanted something short, something that looked good on a dial, and above all, something a Frenchman, a German, an Italian, and an Englishman would all pronounce the same way because he was already thinking about a world market decades before anyone else in the trade was. The story he told was that the word sounded like a watch being wound. Whether that is true or a later embellishment barely matters, and that it barely matters is the tell. Even the name was a design thing, a little machine for traveling across borders and languages without losing a syllable. Nothing about this company was accidental, not the certificate, not the case, not the swim, not even the 5 letters on the front. Then, in 1919, Wilsdorf did the coldest, most instructive thing in the whole origin story. He left London. Britain, after the war, slapped heavy taxes on the luxury imports his watches depended on, and the export duties made the numbers ugly. So he simply moved the entire company to Geneva. He did not fight the tax. He did not lobby. He relocated the business to where the money worked better. And in doing so, wrapped Rolex in the one word that would end up meaning more than almost any advertising he ever bought. Swiss. From that point on, Rolex was not an English assembler of Swiss parts. It was a Swiss watch with everything that word has come to promise. He optimized for tax and geography and accidentally, or not accidentally, bought himself the most valuable adjective in his industry. That certificate was the first product Rolex ever really sold, not the watch, the proof. And notice the shape of the move because you are going to see it again and again. Wilsdorf did not lower the price. He did not widen the range. He raised the standard, got an outside authority to confirm it, and then let the confirmation do the selling. He was building scarcity of belief. Anyone could sell a wristwatch. Almost no one could sell a wristwatch a Naval Institute had signed off on. Then came the case, and the case is where the legend takes physical form. Early wristwatches had an enemy, and the enemy was not time, it was the world. Dust got in. Moisture got in. Sweat corroded the movement. A watch on the wrist lived a far harder life than a watch in a waistcoat pocket, and it died faster. In 1926, Wilsdorf's company patented a case that screwed together crown, back, and bezel all sealed against a central middle and made the whole thing genuinely waterproof. He called it the Oyster because like an oyster it could stay submerged and take no harm. And now he had the second thing every great luxury story needs. He had the object, the Oyster case, and he had the certificate, the chronometer rating. Craft and proof, but he still did not have the one thing that turns a good product into a religion. He did not have the story, so he went and manufactured one. In 1927, a young typist named Mercedes Gleitze swam the English Channel. Wilsdorf strapped an oyster around her neck for the crossing. She was in the freezing water for over 10 hours. When she came out, the watch was still running, perfectly dry inside. And Wilsdorf did something no watchmaker had done before. He bought the entire front page of a national newspaper, not an advert inside, the front page, and turned the swim into an event. The watch that survived the channel. This was not a description of a product. It was a piece of theater, and it worked so completely that the format never changed. Everest, the deepest trench in the ocean. The wrists of test pilots and race drivers and polar explorers. For 100 years, Rolex has run the same play Wilsdorf ran with a typist in 1927. Find a human being about to do something extraordinary. Attach the watch. Let the achievement bleed into the object. You are not buying a timepiece. You are buying a share in every remarkable thing a Rolex has ever been present for. Now, the cost of actually building this. Because it is easy to say Rolex sells a story, and true, but the story only holds because the object underneath it is real, and the object is savagely expensive to make. Most watch brands you have heard of do not make their own parts. They buy movements, buy cases, buy hands and dials from specialist suppliers, assemble them, and stamp a name on the front. It is the Wilsdorf model of 1905, and most of the industry never left it. Rolex left it completely, and over decades and at enormous cost, Rolex bought up its own suppliers and built its own factories until it made almost everything itself, in-house in Switzerland at sea. And the flagship insanity of this is the gold. Rolex has its own foundry. It melts its own gold. It casts its own gold alloys in-house in its own building because it decided it did not even trust outside suppliers with the raw metal. There is a company on Earth that makes billions selling watches, and it chose to also become a gold smelter. That is not efficiency. Nobody builds a foundry to save money. You build a foundry to control everything, and control, you will see, is the entire game. Then there is the certification, the direct descendant of that 1910 test. Every single Rolex movement is sent to the official Swiss Chronometer Institute and tested, and then Rolex tests it again to its own tougher standard on top. Every watch, not a sample, not the flagship models, everyone. That is an army of testing, a mountain of overhead, poured into a guarantee of precision on watches, most of which will spend their lives telling a banker he is late for lunch. It is wildly disproportionate to the need, and that is the point. The cost is not there to serve the customer's need for accuracy. The cost is there to defend the story. Every franc spent on the foundry and the testing is a franc spent making the legend impossible to fake. And it does not stop at the metal. Rolex makes its own movements, the intricate mechanical heart of hundreds of tiny parts, and it engineers pieces of that heart most owners will never hear of. It developed its own hairspring, the tiny coil that governs the entire beat of the watch. out of an exotic alloy immune to the magnetism that throws ordinary watches off because a bought-in hairspring was one more thing outside its control. It runs its own research, its own testing chambers, its own everything. And then, on top of the making, sits the other enormous cost, the one that never appears in a factory. The staging. A century of it. The expeditions, the sponsorships, the tennis and the golf and the motor racing, the deep-sea dives, the constant, patient, expensive purchase of association with excellence. That is not a marketing budget in the ordinary sense. It is the ongoing rent Rolex pays on its own legend, and it has been paying it without a single missed year since a typist climbed out of the channel. So, a competitor looking at Rolex sees a terrifying wall. To compete head-on, you would need to build the factories, buy the suppliers, run the foundry, certify every movement, and then spend a century staging channel swims and mountain climbs to earn the story that justifies the price. The capital is enormous, and the story cannot be bought at any speed. You cannot spend your way to 100 years of history. That wall, the impossibility of catching up, is worth more to Rolex than any patent. Now the real engine. Here's where everyone gets Rolex wrong, including people who own 3 of them. You would assume that a company this desired, with demand this ferocious, would make as many watches as it possibly could. Demand is the dream. Sell more, earn more. That is business. Rolex does the opposite and does it on purpose. Rolex makes roughly 1 million watches a year, and it could, with its factories and its resources, make far more. It chooses not to. For the most wanted models, the steel sports watches, you cannot walk into a shop and buy one. There is a waiting list, and the list can run for years, and for some references, you cannot get on the list at all. A company that could print money by opening the taps instead keeps the taps half shut. Why would any sane business strangle its own supply? Because scarcity is the product. And before we get to why, put a number on the machine so you understand the scale of the restraint. Rolex does not publish accounts, so everything here is outside estimate, not gospel. But the people who study the industry for a living put Rolex revenue somewhere around 10 to 11 billion Swiss francs a year on roughly 1 million watches. That makes it, on its own, bigger than most of the rest of the Swiss watch industry combined. One brand. And that brand sitting on that demand with those factories deliberately holds output flat. A company that could almost certainly sell half again as many watches at full price tomorrow chooses not to. To grasp how strange that is, imagine any other business you know turning away a third of its willing, cash-in-hand customers on principle, year after year, and calling it strategy. Think about what happens when you cannot get the watch. The demand does not go away, it goes somewhere. It goes to the second-hand market, and on that market, people pay more, sometimes far more, than the shop price for a watch they could theoretically buy new if only they could get one. A brand new steel sports Rolex can sell used immediately for well above what it costs in the boutique. Read that again, because it violates everything you know about how objects work. The moment you drive a car off the lot, it loses value. The moment you carry a Rolex out of the boutique, for certain models, it gains value. And that single fact is the most powerful marketing on earth, and Rolex does not pay a penny for it. The premium on the secondhand market screams to every person watching that this thing is precious, that it holds value, that buying one is not spending, it is storing wealth. Scarcity manufactures desire, and desire manufactures the resale premium, and the resale premium proves the scarcity was justified. It is a loop, and Rolex sits in the middle of it, controlling the one lever that keeps it spinning, which is supply. And now layer the ownership back on top, because this is where it becomes beautiful. Rolex has no shareholders demanding growth every quarter. A normal luxury company owned by investors is under permanent pressure to sell more this year than last to make the line go up. That pressure is exactly what would destroy Rolex, because the fastest way to kill scarcity is to satisfy demand. But Rolex is owned by a foundation. It does not have to grow. It does not have to explain a flat year. It can sit on its hands, keep supply tight, watch the waiting lists grow, and let the resale premium do the advertising. And no shareholder can force it to flood the market for a better quarter. The charitable structure that sounds like a footnote is actually the thing that protects the entire scarcity engine. The nonprofit is not despite the profit. The nonprofit is how the profit is protected. So the model, fully assembled, looks like this. Spend enormous money making the object genuinely, verifiably excellent, so the story can never be called a lie. Spend a century staging proof so the story becomes myth. Then deliberately produce less than the world wants, so the object appreciates. So scarcity does the selling for free and shield the whole thing inside an ownership structure that never has to answer to anyone hungry for growth. It is not a watch company. It is a machine for producing controlled scarcity of a thing everyone has agreed to believe in. But do not mistake this for an easy life, because the traps around a business like this are vicious, and they are the exact traps that have killed everyone who tried to copy it. The first trap is the one that looks like success. The temptation always is to make more. Demand is screaming. The waiting lists are years long. Every instinct, every consultant, every ambitious executive says, open the taps, you are leaving money on the table. And they are right for 1 year. If Rolex doubled production tomorrow, it would have a spectacular year. And then the resale premium would collapse because scarcity would be gone. And the moment a Rolex no longer holds its value, the entire story that you are storing wealth, not spending it, evaporates, and you are just an expensive watch competing on features against a phone that keeps better time for free. The thing that makes Rolex money is the restraint. And restraint is the single hardest discipline in business, because it means saying no to demand that is right in front of you. The second trap is the gray market. The exact resale premium that helps Rolex also threatens it. When new watches trade for huge markups, it creates an army of people whose entire business is getting hold of new Rolexes, not to wear, but to flip. Dealers game the waiting list. Genuine enthusiasts who just want to wear the watch are shut out, standing behind speculators. And a brand built on the romance of earning your watch does not want its boutiques to be trading floors for flippers. Manage it badly and the story rots from the inside, the achievement becomes an asset class, and the emotional core. The reason people wanted it in the first place quietly dies. Rolex has to constantly police the line between healthy scarcity and a full-blown speculative frenzy that makes its own customers feel like suckers. The third trap is time itself, in two directions. The counterfeiters first. Nothing on earth is faked more than a Rolex, and every convincing fake chips at the story, because the story depends on the object being unmistakably real and rare. And then the deeper threat, the generational one. The entire value of Rolex rests on a shared belief, passed from one generation to the next, that this specific object means achievement. But meaning is not permanent. A younger generation that does not care about mechanical watches, that measures status in entirely different objects, that sees a 1,000-pound watch as an absurdity next to a device that does everything, could simply stop believing. And the day the belief goes, there is nothing underneath to catch it. You cannot certify your way back into a culture's heart. The foundry cannot smelt relevance. The single greatest risk to a company built on myth is that the myth is only ever one generation from being forgotten. So let me give you the two futures, because that is where this always lands. In the version that works, Rolex keeps doing exactly what Hans Wilsdorf started doing with a typist and a newspaper front page in 1927. It guards the scarcity like the crown jewels, because it is the crown jewels. It keeps making the object genuinely superb so the story can never be exposed as hollow. It uses the foundation shield to ignore every pressure to grow, sells fewer watches than the world wants forever, and lets the resale premium recruit the next generation of believers, one impossible waiting list at a time. In this version, 100 years from now, someone buys a Rolex the day their company sells and hands it to their child, and the whole machine keeps turning exactly as designed. And in the version that fails, some clever executive looks at those waiting lists and those resale premiums and does the obvious, rational, catastrophic thing. They make more. Just a little more at first to capture some of that premium the flippers are eating. And it works for a year, and then a little more. And the scarcity softens and the resale premium sags and the watches start quietly to sit in the cases. And the story, the beautiful 100-year-old story that you do not buy a Rolex, you earn it, becomes just words on a poster above a discounted stack of steel. Because the terrifying secret of Rolex, the one the legend is carefully designed to hide,